Hey friends, it's Miss Jenna. We're here to create an art activity and do a reading, all based on the summer reading program theme of Imagine Your Story. Today it's all about creating castles. Mr. King's Castle by Genevieve Cote. Mr. King lives on top of a big hill. He wants to build himself a big castle. Mr. King likes big things. Chop, chop, chop. Mr. King starts chopping off blocks to build his castle. He's too busy to notice the big holes he's leaving behind. Chop, chop, chop. Mr. King's friends come running. What is that noise? What are those holes? What are these blocks? Mr. King is too busy to hear them. Block by block, bit by bit, his castle is getting bigger and bigger. Mr. King chops until there is nothing left to chop, and builds until there is nothing left to build with. Then he stops and proudly looks out the window. There isn't much of a view, says Mr. King. Down below, his friends are grumbling. What happened to the hill? Asked Bert and Tex. What happened to my favorite napping spot? Asked Harriet. Where are the flowers? Wonders old Jim Elk. What happened to the grass I eat? Asked PJ. And where is our secret stash of nuts? Cries Skit and Scat. One by one, they gather under the castle window. Everyone is staring at Mr. King, and suddenly he feels very small. Uh-oh, that was a big mistake, he says after a while. Maybe I should put everything back. Yay! All his friends jump up to help. Together they start taking down the big castle, block by block, bit by bit. And block by block, bit by bit, they put everything back just like it was before. Well, almost like it was before. There's one piece left, says Mr. King, but I don't see where it fits. What shall we do with it? After whispering to the others, Tex says, close your eyes, we have an idea. When Mr. King opens his eyes, his friends sing out, surprise! Tonight, in his small castle, Mr. King is going to have a big party. We're going to build a castle just like Mr. King, but instead of taking from the environment, we're going to be using materials that you likely already have in your own home. So we're going to do this 3 different ways. The first way is something called a colograph. So a colograph is when shapes that have a little bit of height are placed onto something that's sturdy like cardboard. So it's like a low relief. So what you want to do is cut out a whole bunch of different standard shapes from cardboard or from foam, from styrofoam, anything that's low relief. So if you're using something like a corrugated cardboard, you might want your parents to help you cut those out, or your parents can pre-cut those out, because really the arrangement is the most important thing. So I did end up using glue and let this sit overnight so that it's nice and hard and it's stuck on here. And I can move my hands all the way around, my fingers around, and I can feel the negative space, which is the space that does not have anything glued to it, on top of this low relief space. It is important to glue these so that it has some of that negative space, because that's going to show up really, really well in your print. So to create a print from this, I need something to print it on. So you can use a heavy cardstock or a watercolor paper to capture your print. And I have my paint. So because Mr. King had green blocks, that really kind of inspired me just to try green as well in a few different ways. But you can use any colors that you want. So I'm going to maybe mix some of these colors together. I have this light blue. Maybe I'll add a little bit of green to that. It's making more of a dull green. And I'm going to paint right on top of my cardboard, of my holograph printing frame. And you have to work relatively quickly because as soon as this paint dries, you're not going to be able to pull a very accurate print from it. So I'm just working quickly. I'm using just a standard, this is a watercolor brush, but you can use any paintbrush. You can also dip it onto the paint if you roll the paint out a little thinner. Or I also have a styrofoam, the styrofoam brush here that you can also use, something like that. So I have just a few different colors here. And now I'm going to turn it upside down. As you can see, I used my cereal box for this printing plate as well. I'm going to hold my printing plate nice and sturdy with one hand while I massage it with the other hand, using a nice firm hold, not using really my fingers, it's mostly using the heel of my hand, and I'm moving it all around. And again, you really want to make sure that you're holding with one hand while you're smoothing with the other hand. And maybe your grown-ups helping you with this part so that it doesn't wiggle around. Now, with printing, it doesn't always come out perfectly. It's really about the process, and it's definitely going to have a different look than if you were to just paint it on, and that's okay. It's all about experimentation and trying things out, and then also problem solving. So once I've kind of really rubbed this as hard as I can, I'm going to pick one side and lift, and then I have my print of my holograph on my paper. So this is one way that you can play around with the shapes and the concepts from Mr. King's castle, and I'm going to show you another one. A great way for our youngest learners to explore these concepts are through blocks. So I have some large Duplo blocks, and I'm going to do some stamping with these. So I have two that have 2 points, one that has 4, and one that has 1. I'm going to play around with those placements on this paper. You can encourage your child to try to make it like a castle form, something that has a little bit of structure or engineering. You can ask them who might live inside of their castle based on how it looks. And you can also just let them play. This is something that's really fun and that they're probably going to get excited with. So I am going to dip the bottom part of my block in the paint so that it's totally full. And I'm just going to press down on my paper to leave the shape behind. Now, whenever it's a young child that's doing this, they might have a harder time having an even pressure on their paper. So you might show them one time or have your hands go down first and then they can mirror your hands on top, just kind of feel what that's like. But they're definitely going to want to go fast and kind of spread it all around, maybe overlap. Get the second block in here. So you can imagine that a castle created by a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old might be a little bit more abstract and conceptual than something created by an older child. So here is our Duplo block castle inspired by Mr. King's castle. Now our third type of print is going to be using foam. So I have this styrofoam plate, and something that you can easily do is cut the center out because it's nice and flat, and so you can use this as your printing plates. You can have your young learner cut out some different shapes inspired by the book, or you can have some shapes that are pre-cut as well. So I have some pre-cut shapes here, and I like this activity because it does not involve paint. So if that's something that you really don't want your child messing around with, it's a little bit messy, all you need is a magic marker. But this is definitely something that's a child that has a little bit more fine motor skills, something that they would really need to do because the pieces are a little bit smaller and it requires a little bit more pressure. So I'm going to start with one block, and I think I'll choose a darker color because the darker colors definitely tend to transfer a little bit easier onto the paper than a lighter color. And again, I'm just using a standard watercolor paper. You can also use the heavy stock cardstock. And I think I'll start with a pillar or a column that's running vertical. And again, I'm going to hold with one finger or two fingers, and I'm going to move my other finger around and massage the back so that I have my print. Maybe I'll have a square. I also really like this activity because it's a really easy way to explore shapes with our pre-K students. So before each shape is used, you can always ask, well, what shape is that? Or this shape has 4 sides, so what does that mean? Or this shape is longer than this other shape. Or ask them to point out the differences in the shapes. So these are both rectangles, but one is thinner than the other. I really like the look of this print. It's not exact. It has sort of like this spongy effect that also reminds me of the illustrations in the book. But if you would like these areas to be a little more defined, like how I have in this finished product, is you just need some water and you need a paintbrush. So I have a thinner paintbrush. Now this water is already green and that's just because I used it, but you can start with clear water. And because the magic marker is water soluble, it's going to paint and flow, just like standard paint. So again, this might be for a student that has a little bit of fine motor skill already, that can kind of stay within the line. But again, it's so fun to paint with magic marker. If that's the thing that your child is excited about, just let them play. So in this finished product, you can see that I went around and I painted within all of these shapes. And I also cut out an image, just like how Mr. King is peeking out in the cover of his own castle. I have my own child in here. You can print out an image of your child, or you can look in a newspaper or magazines and cut out. You can have your children decide if there's a princess or a king or a dragon or a unicorn, and they can create their own character. And I just used a little bit of a collage piece for the crown. So there it is. You have your 3 examples, all inspired by Mr. King's castle, and all of them are printmaking activities. I had a lot of fun doing this today, but I'm even more excited to know what you'll come up with on your own.